My daughter-in-law set my old suitcase beside the Christmas tree and smiled at me. "The best gift you can give us," Melissa said, "is to disappear." My son stood behind her and said nothing. It was 7:42 on Christmas Eve. I remember the time because the digital clock on their cable box was right over Melissa's shoulder. The tree lights were blinking red and gold. Nat King Cole was playing quietly from a speaker in the kitchen, and somewhere upstairs my 11-year-old granddaughter Sophie was supposed to be sleeping. I looked down at the suitcase. Brown Samsonite, scuffed corners. One wheel that always pulled slightly left. I'd bought it for Daniel when he left for Ohio State more than 20 years earlier. That almost made me laugh. "You want me gone tonight?" I asked. Melissa folded her arms over a red Christmas sweater. "We think everybody needs a fresh start." Everybody. Funny word. Daniel finally looked at me, but only for a second. "Dad, maybe we shouldn't make this harder than it has to be." I looked around the family room. Carol had picked those oak floors. I had installed the light fixture over the dining table myself because the electrician wanted $300 to do something I could finish before lunch. 6 weeks earlier, I'd paid the property taxes. And now my son was explaining that I needed to leave. I could have ended the conversation with one sentence. Instead, I picked up the suitcase. "All right." Melissa seemed surprised. That was the first time I realized she'd been expecting a fight. "My name is Walter Bennett. I was 68 that Christmas, 4 years widowed and retired from an electrical contracting business. I'd run around Columbus for most of my adult life. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't helpless either. And that was something Melissa had badly misunderstood. The trouble had really started in early November. I'd been spending more time at the house on Hawthorne Ridge Drive because Daniel traveled for work, and Sophie liked having me around. I took her to school sometimes, made pancakes on Saturdays, and handled little repairs. One Tuesday morning, I came downstairs and found Melissa moving my recliner. "What are you doing?" She jumped. "Oh, morning, Walter." She had her phone in one hand and a tape measure in the other. My chair offends somebody. She gave me that tight smile people use when they don't want to admit something. I'm just seeing how the room would look opened up. Opened up for what? Just thinking. I poured coffee and let it go. 2 days later, a man carrying a professional camera came through the front door. Melissa introduced him as Kevin. "He's helping me with something for work." Kevin photographed the kitchen, then the dining room, then the family room. I stood by the refrigerator eating a turkey sandwich while he took pictures of the house I supposedly wasn't supposed to ask questions about. "Nice place," he said. "Thank you," Melissa corrected me. "We've done a lot with it." That caught my attention. After Kevin left, I asked what the photographs were for. "Portfolio stuff." "Your portfolio?" "Yes." I nodded. There are times when getting older helps you. At 35, I would have demanded an answer. At 68, I'd learned that people usually tell you more when they think you aren't paying attention. The next morning, I stopped at Panera on Sawmill Road after dropping Sophie at school. I ordered black coffee and a bagel, opened my laptop, and searched Melissa's real estate page. Nothing unusual. Then I searched the address. Still nothing. I tried her name with the neighborhood. That was when I found a private coming soon presentation that had apparently been shared with potential buyers. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 bathrooms, finished basement, updated kitchen, suggested listing price $689,000. I stared at the screen. At first, I actually smiled. I thought there had to be some explanation. Then I recognized Kevin's photographs. There was my dining table, Carol's curtains. My recliner was missing. I sat there long enough for my coffee to go cold. The strange part wasn't that Melissa wanted to sell the house. The strange part was that Melissa couldn't sell it. She didn't own it. Neither did Daniel. Carol and I had bought that house in 2013 through the Bennett Family Property Trust when Daniel lost his job and he and Melissa were drowning in bills with a baby at home. They were supposed to stay 3 years. 3 became 5. 5 became 10. I never pushed because they were family and because Sophie loved that house. I closed the laptop. For the rest of that day, I kept thinking there had to be something I didn't know. Maybe Daniel knew about the listing. Maybe Melissa was testing the market. Maybe they intended to talk to me. That last possibility was the one I held on to. Daniel was my only child. After Carol died, there weren't many people left in my life whose excuses I still wanted to believe. So I waited. And Melissa became bolder. She complained that my coffee mug made the kitchen look cluttered. She asked whether I'd considered a senior apartment. One afternoon, I heard her talking in the hallway. Once the older gentleman is out, it'll show beautifully. I was standing 10 feet away. She came around the corner and nearly dropped her phone. Oh, Walter. Older gentleman. She blinked. A client. Must be quite a place. She stared at me. I smiled and went back to my newspaper. But what finally changed things wasn't Melissa. It was Daniel. A week before Christmas, I heard them talking after dinner. Melissa said, "Your dad can't keep living like this." Daniel sighed. "I know. He's becoming a burden." There was a pause. I waited for my son to defend me. Instead, he said quietly, "I know." I went upstairs without making a sound. That hurt more than the house ever could. So on Christmas Eve, when they put that suitcase beside the tree, I gave Daniel one last chance. At the front door, I turned around. "Son, are you sure this is what you want?" His eyes moved toward Melissa, then back to me. "Dad." Melissa and I talked about it. "It's better this way." I nodded. "Then I guess tomorrow we find out who actually needs a fresh start." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" I put on my coat. "Merry Christmas, son." Then I carried the suitcase to my Ford, backed out of the driveway, and left them standing inside a house they had somehow convinced themselves belonged to them. I spent Christmas Eve at a Hampton Inn off I-270. It wasn't exactly how I'd pictured the holiday. The woman at the front desk wore plastic reindeer antlers and apologized because the hotel restaurant had already closed. I told her not to worry about it, carried my suitcase upstairs, and ate peanut butter crackers from the vending machine while watching It's a Wonderful Life with the sound turned low. Around 10, I opened my phone. No message from Daniel. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. To understand why I hadn't simply told Melissa the truth when I found her listing, you have to understand how they ended up in that house. Back in 2013, Daniel was 31. He'd been working for a medical supply company in Dublin, Ohio when the company reorganized and eliminated his department. Sophie was barely a year old. Melissa had recently gotten her real estate license, but she wasn't making steady money yet. They were renting a townhouse in Hilliard. One Sunday, Daniel came to our place with a folder full of bills. "Dad, I screwed up." Carol immediately said, "You lost your job." That's not the same thing as screwing up. They had credit card debt, a car payment, student loans, and about 2 months of savings. I asked Daniel what he needed. Time. That was the one thing I could give him. Carol and I had been looking for another property anyway. We found the house on Hawthorne Ridge for $312,000. 4 bedrooms, good schools, quiet street. We purchased it through the Bennett Family Property Trust. Daniel and Melissa would pay enough each month to cover part of the carrying costs. Carol and I would handle property taxes, insurance, and major repairs until they recovered. 3 years, Daniel told me. I laughed. Get back on your feet first, then worry about a calendar. That was probably my mistake. 3 years passed, then 5. Daniel found a good job. Melissa's business improved. They bought newer cars and took Sophie to Disney World. But there was always a reason not to change the arrangement. Carol never cared. "They're doing well," she'd say. That's what we wanted. After she died, I didn't have the heart to change anything. I liked having family nearby. And if I'm being completely truthful, I probably needed them more than I admitted. That was why hearing Melissa call me a burden cut so deeply. Christmas morning, I woke at 5:40 out of habit. For 38 years, Carol had gotten me out of bed early on Christmas morning, whether we had children in the house or not. "Christmas isn't supposed to start at noon," she'd say. I made hotel coffee and stood at the window looking at an almost empty parking lot. At 8:15, I called Frank Delaney. Frank had handled contracts for my electrical company for years and helped Carol and me establish the trust. He answered, sounding half asleep. "Walter, Merry Christmas. You better be calling because you won the lottery." Melissa threw me out. That woke him up. I explained everything. The photographs, the private listing, the suitcase. Frank listened without interrupting. Then he asked, "Where are you, Hampton Inn? Is Daniel with her on this?" "Yes." Frank was quiet. "Come see me tomorrow. Your office is open." "No." "Then why am I coming?" "Because I'm 71 years old and my wife wants me out of the house after 2 days of Christmas guests." I laughed despite myself. At 10 the next morning, I met Frank at his office downtown. He arrived carrying 2 coffees and wearing jeans under a long wool coat. We went upstairs. His office smelled like old books and whatever cleaning product the janitorial crew used. Frank pulled the trust documents from his files. He put on his reading glasses. Bennett Family Property Trust purchased Hawthorne Ridge in June 2013. I know. Current trustee, me. Transfer of title, never. Purchase agreement with Daniel, never. He removed his glasses. Then your daughter-in-law is trying to sell a house she doesn't own. What happens if she actually finds a buyer? Frank leaned back. She'll have a difficult closing. I laughed harder than I should have. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe I just needed something to be funny. Then Frank became serious. Walter, don't turn this into a game. I'm not. If you want Daniel and Melissa out, we do it correctly. Notice deadlines documentation. You don't change locks. You don't shut off utilities. I wouldn't. I know, I'm telling you, because angry people sometimes become stupid people. I looked down at the documents. I don't want to evict my son. Frank's voice softened. Then don't make that decision today. That was the problem. If Melissa had been some stranger, I could have handled it like any other business dispute. But Daniel was the boy I taught to ride a bicycle. The kid who once sat beside me in an emergency room at 16 with a broken wrist and apologized because he thought the hospital bill would be expensive. I could still see that kid when I looked at him, even when he was 41. Frank opened another folder. There's something else. He slid a printed email across the desk. Melissa had contacted a title company on December 19th. She'd requested a preliminary closing consultation. The appointment was scheduled for December 27th at 10:00 a.m. I read it twice. So this wasn't just talk. No, she was actually moving forward. Yes. 3 days after Christmas. 3 days after they planned to remove me from the house. I stared at Melissa's email address at the top of the page. For weeks I'd been telling myself there had to be some innocent explanation. Sitting in Frank's quiet office, that explanation finally disappeared. I folded the paper and placed it back on his desk. Frank asked, "What do you want to do?" I looked at him. Nothing yet. He raised an eyebrow. "Walter, I want to know how far Daniel is willing to let this go." Frank studied me for a moment, and if you don't like the answer, I looked down at the closing date again. Then we stopped pretending this is their house. For the next few days, I did something that surprised even me. I stayed quiet. Not because I was afraid of Melissa, and not because I didn't know what to do. I stayed quiet because I still wanted Daniel to stop this before I had to. That probably sounds foolish. Maybe it was. But when you're a parent, even when your child is 41, part of you keeps waiting for them to become the person you raised. I moved back into the house after Christmas Day without making a scene. Daniel seemed relieved. Melissa seemed annoyed. She acted like my return was temporary. That week she started leaving brochures on the kitchen counter for senior living communities around Columbus. One was in Westerville, another was in Reynoldsburg, a third was nearly 40 minutes away. I picked one up while she was making coffee. Looks expensive. Melissa kept her back to me. They have activities. I already have activities. She sighed. Walter, this isn't about bingo. Good. I'm terrible at bingo. She didn't laugh. That was becoming common. A few nights later, Daniel came home late from a sales trip to Cincinnati. I was sitting at the kitchen table doing a crossword. He opened the refrigerator. Dad, you still up, apparently. He grabbed a bottle of water. I slid one of the senior community brochures toward him. You trying to tell me something? He glanced at it. Oh, that? Yes, that. Melissa's just trying to help. Help who? He rubbed the back of his neck. You know what I mean. I didn't. But I knew he didn't want to say it. So I let him walk upstairs. That was the pattern. Melissa pushed. Daniel avoided. And I waited. A few days later, I drove to Union Cemetery. Carol had been buried there beside her parents. It was cold enough that my fingers hurt inside my gloves. I brushed a little snow off the top of her marker and stood there longer than I meant to. I don't know what you'd tell me to do, I said. Talking to a gravestone feels ridiculous until you've lost someone you spoke to every day for 40 years. Then it feels pretty normal. I could just give it to them. The wind moved through the bare trees. I could sign the house over. Be done with it. That idea had been following me for days. Maybe keeping Daniel in my life was worth more than the property. Maybe Sophie shouldn't have to watch adults fight over a house. Maybe Carol would have chosen peace. Then I heard her voice in my head, almost as clearly as if she were standing beside me. Walter, peace isn't the same as surrender. That sounded like her. She had always been the tougher one. On the drive home, Sophie called me. "Grandpa, hey kiddo, are you still coming to my winter concert Friday?" "Wouldn't miss it." She got quiet. Then she said, "Mom says you might be moving away." I gripped the steering wheel. "Did she? Are you?" "No plans." She said maybe you'd be happier somewhere with people your age. I almost laughed. Instead, I said I'm already around people my age. Every time I go to Costco. Sophie giggled. That helped. Then she whispered, "I don't want you to go." That hit me harder than anything Melissa had said. I realized then that this wasn't just about money or property. Someone was slowly trying to rewrite my place in the family. And if I stepped aside quietly, Sophie might grow up believing I had chosen to leave. That I couldn't accept. The next morning, I went through every file I had. Trust documents, insurance records, property tax receipts, major repair invoices, the roof replacement from 2019, the furnace from 2022, the kitchen renovation Carol had insisted on before she got sick. I put everything in one banker's box. Then I called Frank. "I want copies of everything." He said, "Now you're talking like a client." I've always hated clients, I know. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was doing something instead of just waiting. Then came one of the stranger moments in all of this. Melissa hired a handyman to repair the railing going down to the basement. His name was Ray. I knew Ray. He'd done subcontracting work for me years earlier. He walked in, saw me, and stopped. "Walter Bennett Ray." He laughed. "What are you doing here?" I looked around. "Apparently visiting." He frowned. "I thought this was your son's place." "So does everybody." Ray stared at me. Then he said, "That sounds like one hell of a visit." I laughed. Melissa came around the corner. "What's funny?" "Funny, nothing," I said. Ray looked at me. Nothing at all. By Christmas Eve, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to start anything, but I was done protecting Daniel from the consequences of staying silent. That night, Melissa put the suitcase beside the tree. Daniel backed her up, and I left. You already know that part. What I didn't tell you was what happened after I checked into the Hampton Inn. At 11:18 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was an email from Frank. Subject line, "Call me." I opened the attachment. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw Daniel's name. Melissa had submitted paperwork to the title company representing Daniel as an authorized owner of the house. I called Frank immediately. He answered on the first ring. "This is worse than we thought," he said. "How much worse, Walter? She didn't just try to list properties she doesn't own." I looked out the hotel window at a row of Christmas lights across the parking lot. What did she do? Frank paused. "She submitted documents suggesting Daniel had authority he doesn't have." I sat down on the edge of the bed. Meaning this may not be a family misunderstanding anymore. My stomach tightened. "What is it?" Frank's voice turned flat. "Potential fraud. The word fraud has a way of clearing your head." A few hours earlier, I had been an angry father sitting in a hotel room with a suitcase my son had packed for me. Now I was looking at paperwork that could turn a family argument into something much uglier. "Do we call the police?" I asked. "Not tonight," Frank said. "And not before we understand exactly what she submitted." I rubbed my forehead. "Sophie's in that house. I know. I'm not having cops show up on Christmas morning." Frank was quiet for a second. "Then we slow down and do this correctly." That was exactly what I needed to hear. I barely slept. At 7 the next morning, I drove to a Bob Evans near Dublin because I couldn't stand another cup of hotel coffee. The place was busy. Grandparents were passing syrup to little kids. A man at the next table was trying to assemble some electronic toy with a screwdriver, while his wife gave him instructions he clearly didn't want. I ordered eggs, bacon, wheat toast, and coffee. When the waitress asked whether I wanted pie, I looked at the clock. It was 8:06. "Isn't it a little early?" She shrugged. "It's Christmas. Fair argument." I ordered the pie. I had just finished breakfast when I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Daniel. "Merry Christmas, son." I stared at it, then deleted it. Not because I didn't love him, because I didn't know how to talk to him without pretending nothing had happened. At 10:34, my phone rang. "Sophie," I answered immediately. Merry Christmas, kiddo, Grandpa. Her voice was low. Where are you? I'm staying at a hotel for a couple days. Why just some grown-up stuff? Mom said you wanted space. Of course she did. I looked out the restaurant window. I love you, Sophie. That's the important part. Are you mad at me? That question nearly broke me. No, never, she sniffed. It doesn't feel like Christmas without you. For a moment, I couldn't answer. Finally, I said, sometimes adults make mistakes, sweetheart. Then we have to figure out how to fix them. Are you coming back? I'll see you soon. I refused to promise more. After we hung up, I sat there with my hand around a coffee cup that had gone cold. That call changed something. Until then, part of me had still been thinking in terms of winning. Let Melissa discover who owned the house. Let Daniel panic. Let them feel embarrassed. Sophie reminded me there was a child standing in the middle of all this. I didn't want revenge that burned down everything around it. I wanted a boundary. There's a difference. I called Frank from my truck. Stop the sale. You sure? Yes. And the occupancy, I hesitated. That was harder. Start whatever we need to start, legally. Give them reasonable time. I'll prepare it. And Frank, yeah. No police unless there's no other choice. Understood. The title company received notice before noon. Apparently, things moved quickly after that. At 12:17, Melissa called. I let it ring. At 12:19, Daniel called, then Melissa, then Daniel twice. By 12:41, I had 7 missed calls. On the 8th, I answered. Daniel didn't say hello. What did you do? I sat behind the wheel in the hotel parking lot. Nothing to your house. What? Because it isn't your house. Silence. Then he laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Dad, what are you talking about? The Bennett Family Property Trust owns Hawthorne Ridge. Another pause. That's impossible. No, son. It's paperwork. Mom transferred it. No. She told me. She told you that you'd always have a home. That isn't the same thing. I could hear Melissa in the background. What's he saying? Daniel lowered his voice. Dad, we've lived there 13 years. Yes. We paid you. You paid reduced rent. I paid the taxes, insurance, roof, furnace, and most major repairs. You never told me it was still in the trust. I never told you it wasn't. That shut him up. Then Melissa took the phone. You're doing this because we asked you to move. No, Melissa. I'm stopping you from selling something you don't own. We put years into that house. So did I. This is unbelievable. No. The unbelievable part is that you scheduled a closing consultation without checking the deed. She went silent. That was when I knew Frank's information was accurate. Then she said Daniel said the house was his. I heard Daniel immediately. I never said that. They started arguing while I was still on the line. I closed my eyes. This wasn't satisfying. That surprised me. I'd imagined the moment they learned the truth would feel good. Instead, I felt tired. Daniel. They stopped. I'm hanging up now. Dad, wait. You'll receive paperwork from Frank. Nobody is being put on the street today. You'll have time to make arrangements. You're kicking us out. You handed me a suitcase last night. That was different. I almost laughed. How he had no answer. I ended the call. 2 days later, formal notice was delivered. I gave them more time than Frank said I was required to because Sophie needed stability and because despite everything, Daniel was still my son. Melissa didn't appreciate the gesture. Instead, she started calling relatives. By that evening, my cousin Linda called from Dayton asking why I was stealing Daniel's house. The next call came from Daniel's aunt, then a neighbor. Melissa's version was simple. Walter was old. Walter was angry. Walter had become confused about ownership after Carol died. That last one got my attention. She wasn't merely defending herself. She was trying to make people doubt whether I knew what I was doing. On December 26th, Frank called. You're apparently invited to a family meeting tomorrow. At my house. At the house owned by your trust? Yes. What's the meeting about? Melissa says she wants everyone together to settle this peacefully. I laughed. Who's everyone? Her parents, some relatives, couple of neighbors from what I understand. So she wants an audience. Looks that way. I knew exactly what she was doing. If she could put me in a room full of family and make me look like a bitter old man, maybe I'd become embarrassed enough to sign the house over. Frank asked, you going? I looked at the folder sitting beside me. Trust documents, tax records, the original purchase agreement, and Melissa's emails. Oh yes. Want me there? Absolutely, Frank chuckled. Good. Why good? Because I've been practicing retirement for 3 years, Walter. I could use the entertainment. For the first time that week, I smiled. Melissa wanted a family meeting. She was going to get one. At 5:55 on December 27th, I parked across the street from the house on Hawthorne Ridge. Frank sat beside me holding a thin leather folder. "You nervous?" he asked. "No. You're tapping the steering wheel. I always do that. I've known you 30 years. You don't." I stopped tapping. "All right, a little." There were 8 cars in the driveway and along the curb. Melissa had invited more people than I expected. Her parents were there, her sister Amanda. My cousin Linda had driven in from Dayton. 2 neighbors I recognized were standing near the front window. Melissa had even invited her friend Beth, another real estate agent. Frank looked at the cars. "She certainly believes in witnesses. That's what worries me. I didn't want to humiliate Daniel. That was the part nobody seemed to understand. I wanted my house back. I wanted the attempted sale stopped. But walking into a room and publicly proving your own son had behaved badly isn't something a father looks forward to." Frank opened his door. "You can still leave." I looked at the house. "No, I've left once already." We walked inside. Conversation stopped almost immediately. Melissa stood near the dining table wearing black pants and a cream sweater. Daniel was beside the fireplace. Sophie wasn't there. That was a relief. Melissa's mother had taken her upstairs to watch a movie. Melissa looked at Frank. "You brought a lawyer to Christmas?" I removed my coat. "No, Christmas was 3 days ago. Remember, I wasn't invited." Somebody coughed to hide a laugh. Melissa's face tightened. "Can we please be adults? I'd appreciate that." We sat around the dining table. "My dining table, though I kept that thought to myself," Melissa began. "I asked everyone here because this situation has gotten completely out of control." Nobody interrupted. "Walter is angry because Daniel and I asked him to find another living arrangement. That's not quite." Frank touched my arm. "Let her talk," Melissa continued. "Now he's trying to take our home away from us." Her father, Robert, looked toward me. "Walter, is that true?" "No." Melissa shook her head. "He served us notice. I stopped an unauthorized sale." "It wasn't unauthorized." Frank finally spoke. "Yes, it was." Melissa turned toward him. "And you are Frank Delaney, attorney for the Bennett Family Property Trust." Beth, the real estate agent, suddenly became very interested. I noticed her straighten in her chair. "Melissa said Daniel has lived here for 13 years. Frank nodded. "That doesn't establish ownership. It's his family home." "Also not ownership," Daniel finally spoke. "Dad, can we not turn this into some legal circus?" I looked at him. I didn't invite the audience. That quieted the room. Melissa leaned forward. "Walter, what do you actually want?" "The truth would be a good start." "I've told the truth." I looked at Daniel. "Do you agree with everything Melissa just said?" He rubbed his hands together. "Dad, it's a simple question." He looked around the room, then at Melissa. Finally, he said, "I think you're angry, and I think you're taking this too far." That was it. I had given him every opportunity. I opened the folder. Frank. He pulled out a certified copy of the deed. The property at Hawthorne Ridge Drive was purchased in June 2013 by the Bennett Family Property Trust. He placed it on the table. "The property has never been transferred to Daniel Bennett or Melissa Bennett." Beth leaned forward. "Can I see that?" Frank handed it to her. She read it silently. Melissa said, "That doesn't prove anything." Beth looked up. "Actually, Melissa, it proves quite a bit." Nobody laughed. Frank laid out the property tax records, then insurance documents, then the original purchase paperwork. Every document told the same story. The house belonged to the trust. I was the trustee. Daniel stared at the papers. "You paid the taxes every year?" "Yes." "I thought those were included somehow." "In what?" He didn't answer. Frank then removed the emails. This is where things become more serious. Melissa immediately said, "Those are private." Frank looked at her over his glasses. They were submitted as part of a proposed real estate transaction. Beth read one page. Her expression changed. "Melissa, what you represented Daniel as having authority to sell, he told me the house was his." Daniel's head snapped toward her. "No, I didn't." Everyone looked at him. Melissa stared. "You said your parents bought it for you." "I said they bought it so we'd have somewhere to live. You told me it would be ours, eventually." I thought. Melissa's father leaned forward. Melissa, were you trying to sell a house you didn't own? She looked at him. Dad, please. That's not an answer. The room became uncomfortable in a way no courtroom ever could. Because these weren't strangers. These were people who would see one another at birthdays, graduations, funerals. For the first time that evening, I wondered whether coming had been a mistake. Then Beth quietly gathered a stack of her business cards from the kitchen counter and slipped them into her purse. I noticed. So I said probably a good time for that. Frank looked down quickly, hiding a smile. Even Robert laughed once. Melissa didn't. This is humiliating. I looked at her. I didn't invite everyone. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed hard. So what now, you throw your granddaughter into the street? No, that's exactly what you're doing. No, Melissa, I'm giving you time to move. I looked around the table. I'm not taking their family away. I'm taking my property back. Nobody spoke. I'm not changing locks tonight. I'm not shutting off heat. Sophie will never be without a place to stay because of me. But this arrangement is over. Melissa stood. This family will never forgive you. I looked at Daniel. That's up to them. One by one, people began leaving. Frank squeezed my shoulder before heading outside. Eventually, only Daniel and I remained downstairs. He stood in the family room staring at the Christmas tree. I began gathering the documents. After a minute, he said, "You really own all of it." I stopped. Not because the question surprised me, because after everything that had happened, that was still what he was thinking about. I looked at my son. That's still the part you're worried about. His face changed. He sat down on the edge of the couch. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel covered his face with both hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. I really messed this up, didn't I? I pulled out the chair across from him. Yes, I said. For once, I didn't soften the answer. And for the first time since this whole thing started, Daniel didn't look toward Melissa before deciding what to say next. Daniel and I sat in that family room for a long time. The Christmas tree was still lit. One strand near the bottom kept blinking faster than the others, the way cheap lights sometimes do when they're about to quit. Neither of us mentioned it. Finally, Daniel said, "I should have stopped her." Yes. He flinched a little. I didn't enjoy saying it, but I wasn't going to rescue him from the truth anymore. He rubbed his palms against his jeans. I kept telling myself she was just stressed. Maybe she was. And I thought if I argued with her, everything would get worse. Did staying quiet make it better? He looked down. No. That was the first honest answer I'd heard from him in a while. A few weeks later, Daniel and Melissa moved into a rental townhouse in Westerville. Not because I forced them out overnight, because the arrangement had ended and they finally understood I meant it. Sophie handled the move better than the adults did. Kids sometimes do. She complained that her new room was smaller, then immediately decided the window was better because she could see a maple tree from her bed. I helped her hang a shelf. Melissa wasn't there. She and Daniel had started marriage counseling by then. I stayed out of it. That took effort. For most of my life, I had been a fixer. Bad breaker panel, fix it. Leaking pipe, call somebody and fix it. Son in trouble, step in and fix it. But some things don't improve because a father writes a check or gives up another piece of himself. Daniel had to deal with his marriage. Melissa had to deal with what she had done professionally. The title company reported the irregular paperwork and her brokerage opened an internal review. I did not push for criminal charges. Frank told me I had grounds to pursue the matter more aggressively. I declined. I want the sale stopped, I told him. I want my house back. I don't need blood. Frank nodded. That may be the healthiest thing you've said in 3 months. Don't get used to it. The truth was there were days I wanted to punish Melissa more. I'd remember the suitcase, the way she said burden, the way she tried to make relatives think I was confused because I was getting older. And for a few minutes, I'd imagine making everything harder for her. Then I'd think about Sophie. Revenge feels simple when you only picture the person who hurt you. It gets complicated when innocent people love both sides. By March, the house felt enormous. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 bathrooms, a finished basement I rarely used. Carol's coffee cup was still in the back of one kitchen cabinet because I had never been able to throw it away. One Saturday morning, I stood in that kitchen and realized I was fighting to keep a place I didn't even want anymore. That surprised me. The house mattered because I had refused to let somebody else decide what happened to it. That didn't mean I had to stay. So I called Beth. Yes, the real estate agent who had quietly put away her business cards during the family meeting. When she answered, I said, "You still sell houses?" She laughed. "Usually ones the seller owns. That seems like a good policy." We listed Hawthorne Ridge that spring, legally, openly, with my signature on every document that required it. The market was strong, and I accepted a good offer from a family with 2 young children. At closing, I thought I would feel triumphant. Instead, I felt sad. Carol and I had bought that place to help our son. For a long time, it had done exactly that. A bad ending doesn't erase every good year that came before it. I used part of the proceeds to buy a smaller ranch house outside Columbus. 2 bedrooms, 1 story, a decent garage, a little workshop out back. The first thing Sophie asked when she visited was, "Which room is mine?" "The one with the window facing the yard." She smiled. "Good." Daniel started coming by alone on Saturday mornings. At first, his visits were awkward. We talked about football, gas prices, a new Kroger opening nearby, anything except what had happened. Then one morning we were going through boxes of Carol's photographs in the workshop. Daniel found one of himself at 8 years old sitting on my shoulders at the Franklin Park Conservatory. He stared at it for a while. Then he said, "Dad, yeah, I should have stood beside you. I kept sorting photographs." "Yes, you should have." He nodded. I let the silence sit there. Then I looked at him. "But you're standing here now." That didn't erase anything. It simply gave us somewhere to begin. By the next Christmas, Daniel and I were better. Not fixed. Better. There's a difference. On Christmas Eve, he arrived at my new place carrying something that made me stop in the doorway. The brown Samsonite suitcase. I pointed at it. "You have got to be kidding me." Daniel grinned. "Relax. It's mine this time." Sophie came running in behind him. We found Grandpa's stuff. Daniel put the suitcase on the dining table and opened it. Inside were photographs, old Christmas cards, Carol's handwritten recipes, and a few things Daniel had saved during the move. At the bottom was a picture of Carol standing in front of Hawthorne Ridge the week we bought it. She was younger, laughing at whoever held the camera. Probably me. I sat down. For a moment I couldn't say anything. Daniel stood beside me. "I thought you'd want that." "I do." I put the photograph near the Christmas tree. Later that night, after Sophie fell asleep on the couch and Daniel carried her to the guest room, I stood alone in the kitchen. For years, I had believed keeping the peace was the same thing as keeping a family together. It isn't. Sometimes love means helping. Sometimes it means forgiving. And sometimes it means telling somebody that kindness is not permission to walk over you. What I did wasn't really about taking a house back. It was about taking back the right to decide what happened in my own life. If you've ever stayed quiet because you were afraid that setting a boundary might cost you someone you love, I understand. And if this story reminded you of somebody who needs to hear that kindness and surrender are not the same thing, maybe share it with them. The end.